Are you seriously telling me this is her final request? The words cracked through the concrete room like a spark tossed on a dry powder, sharp enough to make every man inside shift uneasily. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to Hero Tales by Jacob so you never miss these fascinating tales of courage. And let us know in the comments where you're watching today. Sergeant Colin Hayes, square-jawed, Boston-born, and known for mistaking volume for authority, jabbed a finger toward the woman shackled to the steel chair. His disbelief simmered into something uglier as he faced his men, daring them to laugh. And some did. Nervous, shallow chuckles that scraped across the dimly lit interrogation cell like rusted metal. But the woman didn't react. Not when they dragged her in. Not when the zip ties bit deep into her wrists. Not even now. Her name, at least the name they believed belonged to her, was Mara Trent, a supposedly low-level communications tech captured in a border skirmish. To the dozen armed militia fighters crowding the room, she looked like exactly that, a clerk. A quiet nobody with dirt smudged across her cheek and a bruise blossoming along her jawline. Her jumpsuit hung loosely, swallowing her frame. Nothing about her appearance suggested danger. Yet something in her stillness made the oldest man in the room, Lieutenant Robert Kane, feel a slow, cold knot tighten inside his chest. Years of war had made him attuned to the difference between fear and restraint. What sat before them now wasn't fear. It was control. Absolute, bone-deep, frightening control. Hayes paced in front of her, theatrically indignant. Of all things, he barked. You could ask for water, food, a priest, even a damn phone call. But you. He leaned in until his shadow drowned her features. You asked to see your dog? The laughter returned, louder this time, filling the damp cell with a cruel, echoing mirth. Someone muttered, maybe she wants it to comfort her before she cracks. Another chimed in, or maybe she's already cracked. Only Kane did not laugh. He watched her eyes, calm, steady, fixed on a spot past all of them, measuring the room, counting heartbeats, studying exits. He recognized that gaze from men who had survived more than they should have, men who had walked through fire and come out quiet. Mara's breathing remained slow, almost meditative. Her shoulders relaxed, not slumped. Her wrists, though chafed and raw, didn't tremble. Each detail whispered the same truth. She was not waiting to die. She was waiting for something else. Hayes crouched lower, practically spitting his words into her ear. That's your grand last wish? Your dog. Still nothing. Not a flicker of emotion. Kane cleared his throat once, a subtle warning to Hayes, though he doubted the sergeant would hear it. Maybe she's in shock, he offered, though he didn't believe it for a second. Or maybe she thinks we'll pity her. Hayes snorted. I'm not in the business of pity. He straightened, rolling his shoulders like a man preparing for a performance. Fine. You want your mutt? You'll get it. And everyone here is going to watch this touching little farewell. The room hummed with smug anticipation. But Mara Trent didn't flinch. Her gaze did not waver. If anything, if one looked closely, her breath grew even steadier. For 3 days, she had been silent. She had not protested, had not begged, had not bartered. But every minute spent in this cell had been an exercise in patience. A waiting game. A calculation. She had mapped the entire room in her mind. 7 guards, 2 with pistols, the rest with rifles. Only one exit. Hayes carried his sidearm sloppily on his right hip. The youngest guard by the door kept shifting weight nervously, rifle strap too loose to be useful. She absorbed these details not with desperation, but with a quiet professional diligence. Every breath she took was preparation. Every heartbeat a countdown. Her captors mistook stillness for submission. They always did. Hayes barked an order to a pair of guards. Go fetch her pet. It should be in the holding area with her gear. Some kind of military breed. Probably a glorified house dog. The men left, still laughing. The remaining soldiers relaxed their stance, letting the tension bleed out of the room. Their rifles lowered ever so slightly. Their attention drifted. Spectators waiting for entertainment, not warriors guarding a threat. But Mara's eyes. They shifted, just barely, as though she could already hear the distant echo of claws on concrete. This wasn't sentiment. It was timing. Kane watched her more closely now. Something inside him whispered that they were missing something vital. Something enormous. But Hayes bulldozed ahead with the certainty of a man who had never learned to fear what he didn't understand. Minutes passed in thick, waiting silence. Then, footsteps. heavy, purposeful, accompanied by the soft, unmistakable click of claws. The cell door groaned open, and the dog stepped in. Not the kind of animal Hayes and his men expected, not a pampered pet or trembling companion, but a Belgian Malinois, lean and coiled with muscular purpose, wearing a specialized harness of matte black webbing. Its ears pointed sharply forward. Its eyes, dark, intelligent, unsettlingly focused, swept the room with predatory calculation. It paused only once, locking eyes with Mara. A silent conversation, too fast, too layered for anyone else to grasp, passed between them. Kane felt the hairs on his arms rise. Hayes laughed. Well, there you go. Your emotional support animal has arrived. You've got 2 minutes. Say goodbye. But Mara didn't say goodbye. She didn't weep. She didn't tremble. She leaned, ever so slightly, toward the dog. And for the first time since her capture, her voice surfaced. Calm, soft, controlled. Hey, boy. To the guards, it sounded sentimental. To the dog, it was a signal. To Mara, it was the final piece sliding perfectly into place. Hayes smirked. Touching. But Kane felt something else entirely, impending inevitability. Because the dog wasn't wagging its tail. Its muscles were tightening. Its breathing shifted, slower, deeper, anticipatory. Mara's fingers twitched against the harness. Tiny, coded gestures. Invisible to anyone not trained to read them. Hayes opened his mouth to mock her again. He never got the chance. Mara lifted her eyes. Cold. Focused. Prepared. The dog lowered its stance. And the room unknowingly entered the final calm before the storm. The tension in the room tightened, quietly at first, like a thread being pulled through cloth, subtle enough that only Lieutenant Kane felt it. The others, thick with overconfidence, remained blind to the shift, laughing among themselves as if the danger hadn't already stepped through the door and taken its position. The dog, Ranger, didn't move at first. He remained perfectly still, his weight balanced low, his gaze flicking from threat to threat with metronomic precision. Every breath he took was measured, steady, almost eerily synchronized with the breathing of the woman shackled to the chair. Mara Trent tilted her head just slightly, the hint of a nod barely perceptible. Ranger's eyes sharpened, and somewhere deep in Kane's survival instincts, an alarm bell began ringing. Hayes heard nothing, saw nothing, understood nothing. He smirked, pacing in front of Mara like a schoolyard bully too busy enjoying his own voice to notice the wolf at his back. You know, he drawled, I almost admire you. You managed to stay quiet this whole time just so you could cuddle your dog before we put you both down. Touching. Maybe we'll take a photo for you. If Mara heard him, she gave no indication. She looked at Ranger, only Ranger, and the dog's posture shifted again. Not sentimental, not emotional, but tactical. Hayes stepped closer, grinning at her silence. Cat got your tongue? Or did your little pet steal it? That was when it happened. Not a gunshot. Not a shout. Not even a sound from Mara. Just one word. Soft. Precise. Sharp enough to split the air. Execute. The transformation was instant. Ranger went from stillness to motion in a single explosive blur, launching forward with such speed that the nearest guard barely lifted his rifle before the dog was already airborne. His jaws clamped down on the man's wrist with surgical precision, bone cracking beneath the pressure. The guard screamed, dropping the weapon as blood sprayed across the concrete floor. Chaos detonated inside the cell. Shouts erupted. Boots scrambled. Metal clattered. And in the heart of the chaos, Mara moved. Her body shifted with a controlled violence that made every previous moment of stillness suddenly make sense. She hadn't been overwhelmed. She hadn't been frightened. She had been conserving, waiting, sharpening. The zip tie around her wrists, subtly weakened earlier by slow, methodical grinding, snapped as she wrenched her arms apart. The burn on her skin didn't even register in her expression. The guard whose weapon Ranger had disarmed was still screaming when Mara lunged forward, snatching the fallen pistol from the ground before the man's knees hit the floor. She didn't stand. She pivoted from the chair, using its metal frame as an anchor point. Her first shot cracked so loud it rattled dust from the ceiling, punching directly through the chest of the guard closest to the door. He collapsed instantly, his body blocking the only exit. Jesus Christ, one of the younger fighters choked out, swinging his rifle up, hands shaking. Too slow. Mara's second shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him sideways into the wall. He dropped his weapon with a dull clatter, collapsing into a heap. Ranger was already on the move again. He tore across the room in a fawn-colored blur, slamming into a third guard's knees with brutal force. The man toppled backward, head cracking against the concrete floor as Ranger redirected smoothly toward the next threat. Hayes froze, stunned into silence for the first time in his life. The sergeant's arrogance evaporated, replaced by stark disbelief as one brutal truth crashed over him. They had never been in control. "Stop her," he shouted finally, voice cracking. "Shoot her." But his men were panicking, firing wildly and without discipline. Their shots ricocheted off concrete and metal, sparking like furious fireflies in the dim cell. Ranger weaved between them with predatory fluidity, drawing fire away from Mara with every calculated dash. Mara rose from the chair with the slow, deliberate calm of someone trained for chaos. Her face remained expressionless as she fired again, the bullet finding its target between the ribs of a guard who had barely lifted his rifle. 3 seconds. For bodies down. The remaining fighters backed toward the wall, their earlier contempt dissolving into raw, animal fear. Kane watched in horrified awe, unable to move, unable to breathe. He had seen trained operators before. He had fought alongside seasoned soldiers. But this was something else. Something colder, cleaner, deadlier. Mara swept her gaze across the room once more, calculating. Ranger darted back toward her, positioning himself at her flank, muscles tight and ready. Hayes finally managed to yank his pistol from its holster, his hands trembling. "Stay back," he bellowed, though the command held no power. "Drop the weapon, or I swear." Mara didn't even turn her head toward him. Instead, she said quietly, "Ranger." The dog's head snapped toward her, awaiting the next command. Hayes stumbled backward, panic flooding his voice. Don't you dare." Mara raised her gun, not in anger, not in haste, but with a calculated grace that silenced the room far more effectively than any shout. Lieutenant Kane felt his pulse thundering in his ears. He saw the inevitability in her posture. Hayes had mocked her, underestimated her, tried to break her. Now Mara Trent stood in front of him with the poise of someone who had already accepted the outcome. Her finger tightened over the trigger, and Hayes finally realized the truth. This woman had not asked for her dog as a final wish. She had asked for him because he was the key, a living weapon, a partner, a force multiplier. And now that force was fully unleashed. Mara's voice, quiet, steady, final, cut through Hayes' trembling breaths. "You should have let me stay silent." Her shot rang out. Hayes collapsed. The room fell into a suffocating stillness broken only by Ranger's soft growl and the faint metallic ring of the spent casing hitting the concrete. In under 10 seconds, the power dynamic of the cell had been utterly rewritten, and Mara Trent, formerly a low-level tech, stood alone among the fallen, weapon steady, breathing calm, her dog at her side like the shadow of death itself. Smoke from the gunfire hung in the room like a low, choking fog, the kind that clung to the lungs and made the silence feel heavier than the violence that preceded it. Ranger stood poised beside Mara, chest rising in steady, disciplined breaths. His eyes never stopped moving. Neither did hers. For a moment, no one spoke. No one dared. Lieutenant Kane's pulse hammered in his ears as he stared at her. The woman who, minutes ago, had looked like a fragile prisoner. Now she stood as the calm center of a storm she had personally engineered. Her grip on the pistol was steady. Her shoulders relaxed. Her heartbeat, he suspected, barely elevated. She wasn't in survival mode. She was in mission mode. And Kane understood, somewhere in the gut-level instincts forged by decades of war, that he had just watched the opening chapter of something far bigger than a prisoner escaping. Mara stepped forward without hesitation, her boots silent on the concrete floor. She didn't give Hayes so much as a second glance. He lay sprawled, motionless, his earlier confidence dissolved into a crimson pool spreading beneath his uniform. Kane swallowed hard. If she had wanted to kill everyone in the room, she would have. The fact that he was still breathing meant she had made a decision, one that had nothing to do with mercy and everything to do with strategy. She pointed her weapon at the last remaining conscious guard, a lanky kid with trembling hands whose rifle lay out of reach. He pressed himself back against the wall, whimpering under his breath. "Don't," he whispered. "Please. I won't fight." Her voice was a quiet blade. Then don't. Ranger bared his teeth, low growl vibrating through the small room. Kane felt it in his bones. The guard slid down the wall and curled his shaking hands over his head. Mara never looked back at him again. Her attention snapped to Kane. He felt the weight of her gaze before he met it. Cold, calculating, predatory in its clarity. But there was something else there too. Something Kane couldn't quite name. It wasn't threat. It wasn't fear. It was assessment. She was categorizing him as either an obstacle or a resource. Kane forced his breath to steady, raising his empty hands slowly. I'm not your enemy. Her expression didn't change. She didn't believe him. She also didn't shoot him. A small victory. Ranger, she murmured, and the dog instantly pivoted toward the doorway, guarding it with lethal purpose. Mara's pistol followed a second later. Footsteps thundered in the hall. Shouts echoed from deeper in the compound. Panic spreading through the fortress like a live wire. Reinforcements. Dozens of them, judging by the sound. Seconds away. Kane made a decision. A risky one. Probably a stupid one. But a necessary one. If you stay here, he said quietly, you'll be overrun. You know that. Mara didn't look at him. She kept Ranger centered on the doorway, ready to strike the moment it opened. I know, she answered simply. And you don't intend to die. It wasn't a question. Not today, she said. Kane's breath caught, not in fear, but in something like awe. She wasn't boasting. She wasn't threatening. It was a simple, factual assessment of her own capabilities delivered with terrifying sincerity. Mara, he said, though he suspected that wasn't her real name. There are at least 30 men in that hall. You're good. God knows you are. But you can't shoot your way through all of them with one pistol. Her eyes flicked to him, the faintest acknowledgement. I don't need to shoot all of them. Ranger's ears perked as the boots grew louder. The metal latch rattled. Someone shouted an order on the other side. Kane's muscles tensed automatically. Anticipation, not bravery. Listen to me, he said quietly. There's an access stairway at the end of the next corridor. It leads to Sector 3. The men there are not under Hayes' command. They won't fire. Unless provoked. She listened, but her expression gave nothing away. They've got armored bulkheads, Kane continued. Once you're inside, you can hold out long enough to negotiate or escape. But if you stay here, he swallowed hard, you'll be boxed in. For the first time, a flicker of thought crossed her eyes. Not trust. Not gratitude. Calculation. Why help me, she asked. He didn't hesitate. Because I'm not Hayes. Because I saw what you are before he died not seeing it at all. And because if you wanted me dead, I wouldn't still be talking. A beat of silence. Then Mara nodded once, a single precise movement. Ranger. With me. The dog moved instantly, taking point. Mara shifted her stance, pistol raised, body angled toward the door. Kane stepped into position at her back, not fully beside her, not ahead of her. Just close enough to prove his intent. The lock clicked. Kane exhaled. What are you going to do when that door opens? Her voice was a whisper of steel. What I have to. The door burst inward. 3 fighters charged through first, but not fast enough. Ranger launched like a bullet, knocking the lead man off his feet before he could even aim. Mara's first shot took the second in the leg, sending him crashing into the third. Kane grabbed the man's rifle as it fell, racking the bolt with practiced speed. For the record, he muttered, I still don't want to be your enemy. Mara didn't look at him. Then don't get in my way. They moved. Fast. Precise. Silent except for the controlled rhythm of gunfire. Mara flowed down the corridor like water made of steel, every gesture efficient, every step calculated. Ranger pivoted and weaved, anticipating threats before they rounded corners. Kane followed, heart pounding, realizing with every passing second that he was witnessing something extraordinarily rare, a human weapon, purpose-built and terrifyingly effective, operating at full capacity. By the time they reached the stairwell, alarms blared across the compound. Voice commands echoed overhead. Boots pounded, but no one dared rush the narrow hall where they had left 5 men incapacitated in under 20 seconds. Mara paused at the top of the stairwell, listening, breathing shallow and quiet, her eyes darting with lightning-fast analysis. Kane panted behind her, chest burning. Sector 3 is clear, he said. We can make it. Mara shook her head. No, she murmured. Someone's coming. Kane stilled. And then he heard it. The slow, unhurried footsteps of someone who wasn't running with the panicked chaos of Hayes' men. Someone who walked like they already understood what waited around the corner. Someone who wasn't afraid. Ranger's hackles rose. Mara lifted her weapon. Kane's stomach dropped. From the shadowed end of the corridor, a figure stepped into view. Tall, composed, unarmed, at least visibly. His voice when he spoke was calm, commanding, a voice that expected to be obeyed. Mara Trent, he said. Stand down. Kane's blood iced. Because only one man in the entire fortress had that tone, that quiet authority, that chilling stillness. Commander Victor Radek. And he, unlike Hayes, understood exactly who he was facing. The real battle was just beginning. For a long, suspended moment, no one breathed. Commander Victor Radek stepped fully into the narrow corridor, the flickering overhead light catching on the streaks of gray at his temples. He carried no rifle, no visible sidearm, no frantic urgency. He didn't need any of those things. Power clung to him the way dust clung to concrete. Quiet, settled, immovable. Ranger lowered his body, muscles coiled, a low growl vibrating through the floor. Mara didn't blink. She redirected her pistol toward Radek's center mass with the smooth efficiency of someone adjusting a thought, not a threat. Kane felt the air shift. He'd seen Radek intimidate entire squads into silence. But Mara Trent was not one of his squads. Radek stopped 5 feet away, planting himself like a man who had no intention of retreating, not physically and not philosophically. Call off your dog, he said, his voice low, steady, almost conversational, or he's going to get himself killed. Mara didn't move, didn't speak, didn't waver. Her eyes narrowed, barely, but Radek noticed. He noticed everything. Kane stepped forward cautiously, palms raised. Commander, sir, maybe let's not escalate this. Radek didn't even grant him a glance. Kane, if you don't want to die in the next 20 seconds, step aside. Kane froze in place, his mouth snapping shut. Radek's calm was terrifying not because it was threatening, but because it was sincere. He spoke the way a man does when he is merely observing the inevitable. Mara's grip tightened on the pistol. Ranger shifted closer to her leg, and something flickered in Radek's eyes, recognition. You're not Mara Trent, he said softly. Are you? The silence that followed was razor-edged. Kane's breath stalled. He knew Radek was good, but this was something else. Radek took another measured step forward. Not aggressive, not reckless, just certain. You're someone else entirely. Still, she didn't answer. Radek nodded slowly, as if confirming a suspicion only he understood. I know what a trained ghost looks like. Mara's expression didn't change, but something inside the air did, a subtle tension, like two storms acknowledging each other before the collision. What do you want? She said calmly. Radek actually smiled. A small, dark curve of the lips, not amusement. Calculation. I want to talk, he replied. That's not an answer. It's the only one you'll get until you stop pointing that weapon at my heart. Mara didn't lower the gun. Ranger didn't step back. And Radek, astonishingly, seemed satisfied by that. He clasped his hands behind his back, shoulders relaxed, posture almost academic. You're trying to reach Sector 3. Good choice. Limited entrances. Reinforced doors. But you won't get far before Hayes loyalists regroup at the junction. They'll flood the corridor with explosives if they can't take you down by rifle. She didn't react. He continued anyway. I assume escape is your objective. It's what any smart operator would attempt. But the surface is sealed. The perimeter is on alert. And the helipad is locked down. Ranger's growl deepened. Kane swallowed hard. Radek spread his hands slightly, his voice deceptively gentle. You're boxed in. Mara tilted her head. Am I? Radek's eyes sharpened at the edges. I think you already know the answer. Kane felt sweat trickle down his spine. This was no interrogation. It was a negotiation. A private battle of intellect playing out in front of him. Finally, Mara spoke. You're not here to arrest me. No, Radek said simply. You're not here to kill me. No, then what are you here for? His reply was soft, chilling, unmistakably sincere. To stop the idiots in this fortress from making the worst mistake of their lives. Kane blinked. Sir, with respect, what the hell is going on? Radek finally looked at him. Kane, you don't have the clearance for that answer. Then, back to Mara, and this time his voice lost every trace of softness. You're not a comm tech. You're not a clerk. You're not a random prisoner. I know exactly who you are. Not the name you gave at intake. The real designation your people use for someone like you. Ranger stiffened at Mara's heel. Radek took a breath. You're a Specter. Kane's heart slammed against his ribs. The word carried weight. Rumor, myth. Operators whispered about Specters the way civilians whispered about ghosts. They weren't soldiers. They weren't intelligence officers. They were something else entirely. Shadows molded for one purpose, surgical-level destruction. Mara didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it. She didn't have to. Radek read the silence for what it was. Good, he murmured. Now we can be honest. What do you want? She asked again. I want the fighting to stop. Kane's brow shot up. Radek, the infamous iron-fisted commander, talking about de-escalation? It didn't make sense. Not in this place. Not in this war. Mara kept the gun trained on him. Why me? His answer came without hesitation. Because you're the only one in this building who isn't thinking emotionally. And because the people who sent you here trust you enough to negotiate. She stiffened slightly. Her composure didn't waver, but the shift was real. Radek caught it. He pressed. You made contact, didn't you? Mara didn't speak. You activated a channel. Not long ago. Before Hayes dragged you into that cell. A beat. And if I'm right, someone is already listening. Ranger emitted a low, warning rumble. Mara's eyes narrowed. Radek lifted his chin toward her collarbone. Your earpiece, he said quietly. Kane froze. He hadn't noticed any device. She'd been searched. Stripped. Checked. But Radek wasn't guessing. You masked the wire under the inner seam of your jumpsuit, Radek said softly. Brilliant work. Hayes' men never would have seen it. They don't know what professionalism looks like unless it screams. Mara's jaw tightened. So he had seen it. So he had been watching her. So he had been waiting. Commander, Kane whispered. What exactly are you doing? Radek didn't break eye contact with Mara. What I always do, he said. Preventing my men from dying for stupid reasons. Voices erupted at the far end of the hall. Reinforcements. Rifle bolts chambering. Orders shouted. Boots stomping closer. Radek didn't flinch. They'll be here in 10 seconds, he said calmly. And if you fight them, the entire fortress will collapse on itself in a civil mutiny. Which means your extraction will fail. Which means your mission fails. Which means everything you've done so far is wasted. Mara breathed once, slow, steady, grounding. Radek took one final step toward her. I'm offering you something Hayes never could, he said softly. A way out that doesn't end in a bloodbath. For the first time since her capture, Mara lowered her pistol. Only an inch, but it was enough to shift the gravity of the moment. Ranger's growling softened. Kane exhaled shakily. Radek nodded, relieved. We'll talk in my quarters. Neutral ground. No weapons. No traps. Just strategy. He waited. The reinforcements were seconds away. Mara Trent, Specter, Ghost, Operator, looked up at him with unreadable eyes. Then she said the words that would rewrite everything. Ranger. Stand down. The hallway reverberated with the pounding of boots, a wave of chaos rushing toward them. Shouts overlapped. Weapons were raised. Safeties clicked off. The entire fortress surging to swallow a threat none of them understood. But at the sound of Mara's calm command, Ranger eased back onto his haunches. The growl in his throat faded to a controlled rumble, his gaze still fixed on the corridor, but his posture no longer screaming for violence. That single gesture, one measured release of tension, shifted the air as surely as if the walls themselves had inhaled. Radek didn't smile. He merely nodded once, an acknowledgement between predators. Good, he said quietly. Now let them see you're not the enemy. Kane raised both hands as the reinforcements stormed the corner. Hold your fire, he shouted. Stand down, stand down. The squad skidded to a halt at the sight of Radek's silhouette blocking the corridor. Their weapons wavered, muzzles lowering only slightly. Their eyes darted between the bodies on the floor, the armed prisoner, the dog, and their commander. What the hell? One of the fighters breathed. Radek cut him off with a glare sharp enough to slice concrete. She's under my protection, he said. His tone brooked no negotiation, no hesitation. Anyone who disobeys me answers for it directly. The soldiers stiffened, shocked into compliance. Radek's authority was never theatrical. It was carved from a reputation for making examples. No one wanted to become the next. Mara kept her pistol in a neutral ready position, pointed down, finger off the trigger, but still controlled. She didn't trust the moment. She didn't trust the silence. She didn't trust the half-dozen rifles aimed vaguely, but not entirely away from her. Ranger's ears flicked. He understood the stakes as clearly as she did. "Commander," said one of the men cautiously. "Sergeant Hayes ordered. Hayes is dead." Radic interrupted, his voice flat. "He died because he mistook stupidity for strength. His orders died with him." The blunt truth rippled through the squad, wiping out any remaining confusion. Hayes had been feared, not respected. The idea of contradicting Radic while their bullying sergeant lay cooling on the floor was unthinkable. Radic lifted his chin toward the stairwell. "We're going upstairs. No one follows unless I call for you. Make yourselves useful and secure the cell block. And get a medic for the wounded." Kane's brows shot up in surprise. Radic had never been known for mercy, but then, today had shattered many assumptions. The soldiers dispersed reluctantly, still casting uneasy glances at Mara and Ranger as they backed away. When they were finally alone, Radic gestured toward the stairs. "This way." Mara didn't move. Her stillness was different now, not the silence of a cornered operative, but the silence of a strategist deciding whether the man in front of her was an asset or a threat. She studied Radic carefully, her posture rooted, her expression unreadable. "You want to negotiate," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." He didn't elaborate. "With me?" "Yes." "Not with my command." Radic's eyes flicked, just once, to her collarbone. She knew he had seen the concealed line running beneath her jumpsuit. "You contacted them," he said, "which means they're listening. And if they heard what happened downstairs, they're not sending a rescue. They're preparing a strike." Mara's jaw tightened. He wasn't wrong. Specters didn't wait for rescue. They extracted themselves, or their handlers leveled the map. Kane exhaled slowly. "So what's your plan?" he asked Radic. "Walk her into your office, and what? Talk peace." Radic didn't look at him. "She's the key," he said softly. "The only person in this building with the focus and discipline to see the difference between surrender and strategy." Mara didn't answer, but she holstered the pistol. The movement was slow, intentional, a gesture of controlled risk. Ranger mirrored her energy, rising and stepping to her side, ever watchful. Radic stepped aside, granting her the path up the stairs first, an unexpected show of respect, or calculation, or both. Kane followed behind them, catching the look in Radic's eyes. A man who had just placed a bet on a knife's edge and hoped it wouldn't cut him first. They ascended into a quieter corridor, reinforced walls, sealed windows, fewer guards. This was Radic's territory, not Hayes. The air felt different here. More ordered, more thoughtful, more dangerous in a quieter, more methodical way. When they reached his quarters, Radic opened the steel door and stepped back again, allowing Mara to enter first. It wasn't an invitation. It was acknowledgement. Inside, the room was stark but meticulous. A desk, maps pinned with multicolored markers, a secure comm terminal, and a single, worn-out armchair that looked like the only comfortable object in the entire fortress. Radic closed the door behind them. Mara stood in the center of the room, arms at her sides, every muscle in her frame balanced and ready. Ranger sat beside her, eyes locked on Radic. Kane leaned against the wall near the door, torn between curiosity and disbelief. Only then did Radic allow himself to breathe fully. "Your presence here," he said slowly, "has changed everything." Mara didn't respond. Radic continued. "Hayes believed capturing you would break you." He shook his head. "Instead, he handed us the one person who can keep this place from burning to the ground." Mara lifted her chin slightly. "And why would I want to do that?" "Because the alternative is worse, for both sides." She didn't deny it. Didn't agree either. So Radic went further. "You've already made contact. I know how your people operate. If you don't transmit a cease negotiation code soon, they'll assume you're compromised." Mara's expression betrayed nothing, but her silence was confirmation. Radic stepped closer, not threatening, but earnest. "You can reach them. You can explain. You can prevent a strike. I can give you that access, that time, that safety." Mara's eyes narrowed. "And in exchange?" Radic's answer was blunt, simple, unguarded. "A ceasefire," he said. "A corridor for prisoner exchange. A halt to escalation. I'm not looking for victory. I'm looking for survival." Kane stared at him in disbelief. "Sir, since when do you negotiate?" Radic's gaze didn't leave Mara. "Since I realized the woman in front of me is the only person in this region who understands the price of arrogance." A quiet stretched across the room. Long tense. Electric. Finally, Mara reached up, slowly, and touched the seam of her jumpsuit. With a subtle motion, she withdrew the micro-earpiece Kane had never managed to detect. Ranger watched her hand, alert but calm. She held the device between her thumb and forefinger. Radek stood perfectly still. Kane felt his stomach twist. This was the moment. The fulcrum. The pivot. You want me to talk to them? Mara said softly. Yes. To stop the strike. Yes. To keep everyone in this fortress alive. Radek's voice lowered. To keep yourself alive. Mara looked down at the tiny earpiece. Her breathing steady. Her eyes sharp. Then, with the smallest shift in her posture, she made her decision. Ranger's ears pricked. Kane held his breath. Radek didn't move. Mara said the words that would determine the fate of every man in the fortress. Open the channel.